Good morning, everyone. This is Amy Henderson with the Georgia Municipal Association. We appreciate you guys being here this morning to talk about a really important issue, cybersecurity, and the challenges that cities face with this. We're privileged today to have Iven Connary, who is the Chief Technology Officer for vSector, a security technology company. I hope I'm saying that right.
Correct.
And Iven has some background also with government agencies, worked for the state at one point, helping them set up some of their technology to be secure. And of course, then a long career after that doing cybersecurity. So I'm going to turn it over to Iven to give us his take on it. If you have questions, please type those in, and we will definitely get to those at the end. So Iven, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Amy. Topic today, IT security challenges, and specifically how they apply to small government, municipal, local government. So most of the headline material these days is about the NSA getting hacked or some large company suffering intrusions, and that's, of course, headline material, but not necessarily your concern here. So content of this presentation is geared very much towards the concerns that folks in attendance here would have today. Quick blurb about myself. I've been in IT security now for the bulk of my career, about 20 years. Very early on, that time was spent basically breaking into systems as a service for our customers. So this notion of penetration testing is still commonplace. The best way to test your security is to have somebody actually try to break in and then share their findings and help you close those holes. From there, moved into security product design and development, and that led to what I do today, which is effectively still the same, concept and development of new security technologies. So moving right along, oops, advance the slide here. So let's talk for a moment about why we're all here. It really goes without saying, IT security is daily headline material. It's rare that a few days pass before there's some major news about a major organization or a government getting hacked. Just to name a few, most recently, it was difficult to avoid this in the news, but largely throughout Europe and I think specifically in England, there was a ransomware attack. Ransomware is a form of virus, malware, if you will, that essentially takes your data hostage and denies you access to your own data. The software will infect your computer, it will encrypt all of your data, and then pop up a warning, a message saying, hey, if you'd like access to your data again, you got to pay us some money. This attack actually hit the British National Hospital Network and effectively shut down the national healthcare system. So very clearly a significant issue. The presidential election, another topic constantly in the news. You know, your personal politics aside, conspiracy theories aside, one thing that is clear is that there were some significant security events that happened there. Data was stolen, data was shared. It had an impact, and that's really as far as we need to go into that. But absolutely a material event in this industry. Another one, just to go on a few more, 2015. This one didn't quite make the news. I think it should have, but also a major event. Office of Personnel Management is a federal organization, agency that tracks identity, personal information for federal government workers. And they were compromised, data was stolen. The reason this is so significant, or a reason, is because they also track the identities of intelligence operatives in employment with the federal government. So very clearly that was data that we did not want to share, and unfortunately it was. And still to this date, very little is known about who actually broke in and what they've done with that information. But, you know, in a perhaps related story recently, it was announced that the U.S. intelligence capabilities in China have been dramatically reduced because a large number of their informants were executed. So you could connect the dots there. I'm not going to do it, but in this one, there's another great example. 2014, Lockheed Martin, one of the largest U.S. government contractors. These guys are involved in pretty much every aspect of the U.S. defense industry, but perhaps most notably aircraft design. Somebody broke in and deliberately stole the designs for the F-22 stealth fighter. And, you know, pop up a quick image here to perhaps indicate what impact that might have had, there's a striking similarity between US fighter design and foreign fighter design. So again, I'm not going to explicitly connect those dots, but you don't have to try too hard. So as far as your concerns in all of this, clearly you don't work for Lockheed Martin. You're not, tracking the identities of U.S. spies, but absolutely, you have some concerns, and we want to talk about those here. So why would people be interested in you? I'll get into that in a moment, and perhaps more to the point, what do you have to lose? What is your risk and what is your exposure? So first and foremost, yes, you absolutely are a target. And specifically why? The bad guys in this picture, they're not looking for challenges. They're looking for easy targets. They're looking to maximize the efficiency of their operations. You have to understand that most of the bad guys here are not kids in their basement. They are not trying to break into their high school and change their grades. These are effectively organized criminal operations. They operate very much like a business, and they're looking for the low-hanging fruit. And so most of the attacks that they initiate are not even targeted. They are indiscriminate and automated. They put in place software they write that systematically scours the internet for weak targets. They don't really care who they are, where they are, what they are, but they're looking for systems to break into. And once that initial target is acquired, they'll sit on that for a time and wait until a larger opportunity presents itself where they can make use of that target. And state, local government, small government is a great example of how that can be put into play because of this last point here, the trust relationships. You are not working in isolation if you're in state or local government. You are part of a much larger government operation tied into state systems and also perhaps tied into federal systems. And that is really what the bad guys are looking for. That's where the value is for them. They want to take advantage of the fact that you have a relationship with these large organizations. It might be upstream government systems. It might be utilities in the neighborhood. It might be financial systems. Clearly, you're processing transactions, so money is moving through your systems, and that is what the bad guys are after. So, the idea to put out of your head right now, right here, is that the bad guys don't care about you. They may not care explicitly about, county XYZ in Georgia, but if you have a relationship with one of these large organizations, they realize that that's in place, and that is possibly ripe for the picking if they can compromise your systems. So in the news, specifically local government, small government in the news, there have been quite a few instances of local government systems being compromised. So just a few years back, upstate New York, a dam control system was breached. And fortunately, it turns out the dam was fairly minor in the larger scheme of things as far as the role that it played in the region's infrastructure. But there is an interesting coincidence there. The name of the dam that was compromised was eerily similar to a major dam system, a waterway that played a major role. And so there's some speculation that the attackers here actually mistargeted. They picked the wrong region. But you can read all about that. It's published widely. It was a well-studied event. The guys who did it were actually caught and prosecuted. 2015, Seattle, which is obviously a very large city and also has a very vibrant tech sector and probably has a fairly mature security operation, they detected a very, very sophisticated attack against their power grid system. And they managed to stop it. But they documented this, they shared their findings, and this made it into the news as well in a very big way. So here, a smaller case of security breach that actually did result in a financial loss. Again, provide links where you can read about all of these things. I assume we're going to share the presentation after this, so you guys are free to read up and get the details on each of these. But these are absolutely relevant events and great examples of why you should have a concern about this. So what is your risk? Why do we care about this? What happens if something gets stolen or broken into? So security risks can be broken into a set of categories. But the first one, probably the most obvious one, is this: denial of service. Your job in government is to provide services to your citizens. If you are unable to do that, you can't do your job. And again, a great example of how that can have an impact is the event of just last week, this ransomware attack, where hospital systems were shut down as a result of a widespread attack. And the final report is not out on this, but I fully expect that the finding in that is going to be that people actually lost their lives as a result of this. These hospitals couldn't operate, they couldn't perform surgeries, things started to back up, and I bet there was a measurable rate of mortality associated with this attack. And that actually might be a first, where they can directly pin a cyber attack to people losing their lives. So perhaps more pertinent, though, to local government, infrastructure, power, water, communications, telephone systems. If these go down, then absolutely people are going to be affected by that, and perhaps also in life-threatening ways. Financial loss, this is generally where an attacker is going to focus their efforts. If you lose money, that's obviously not something anybody wants to have happen here, but it's a very, very much a potential possibility. There's a finer point here to make, though, which is this: PCI compliance. I'm guessing most folks are aware of what PCI is. PCI is the payment card industry. They have a set of data security standards that you, as a credit card processor, are expected to maintain. And they may not apply directly to you, they will apply to your upstream provider, but your upstream provider in turn will have requirements that you have to follow so they can remain in compliance. If you do not comply and you have repeated violations of this, perhaps repeated attacks, theft of credit card data, they might actually shut you out of the system. That happens on a fairly regular basis, actually. So if you cannot process credit card payments, then what recourse do most citizens have actually to pay? It's kind of the de facto way to move money in the digital age. And then naturally, legal liability. I'm not a lawyer, can't speak specifically to the details of this, but certainly I think a case could be made that if data is not reasonably secured and is then compromised, and then financial losses result from that, a judge may not find you in favor. This is about performing basic due diligence and safeguard and safekeeping of your customers' data. Final point, again, this kind of goes without saying, credibility and trust. And this is really paramount in government. Ultimately, your responsibility is to provide a service to your citizens. And if they do not feel safe sharing their data with you, then again, you are not going to be able to perform the duties that you're required to. So what can you do? I won't lie to you, challenges are absolutely significant, and even more significant on a smaller scale operation. If you do not have dedicated IT budgets for security, limited IT staff, and perhaps more specifically, you have no dedicated IT security staff, as you would find in a large organization, you're facing some very real difficulties here. IT is obviously a deep technical subject, and it's easy to make mistakes. And if you're not focused exclusively on this, then you are definitely walking a fine line. And this is a point here that often gets made. There's no reward when you don't get broken into, but there are harsh consequences when you do. So the point really to make here is it can be difficult to justify expenditures on IT security. In the IT security industry, though, very much the way that expenditures are looked at, it falls into the same category as insurance. You probably won't get in a car accident, but if you do, you should have insurance. The law actually requires that. Same applies here, although there's no legal requirement at this point to spend money on IT security programs, but nonetheless, the analogy holds, I believe. So what can you do? Quick short list: stay informed, be reading the news, make it part of your daily routine. If you are in charge of IT systems, you should subscribe to some basic news feed that will let you know when Windows XP or Windows 2000 whatever has a major security event that you might need to take action on. Don't just sit there and assume that your IT systems are safely humming away and are safe from attackers. Generally, when IT security news happens, it requires very, very quick action. Otherwise, you do stand the risk of getting compromised. And in fact, again, to take that, the NHS ransomware attack, the vulnerability that was all based on was a Windows XP problem that had actually been fixed many, many months before by Microsoft. But none of those hospital systems had the patch, the fix, applied. And that's why and how they were compromised. So quick action is absolutely required, and action requires knowledge and current knowledge of industry trends and events. Another major point to make here: vigilance. Trust nothing. A lot of attacks are attempting to exploit the fact that you might not be paying a lot of attention to your IT systems and might dismiss warnings and notifications as they come up. So anything that comes across your desk related to IT security is probably worth at least a few moments of your time. And while these certainly are best practices, I'm actually going to go through a few very, very basic principles in security here in the next slide. That are, I think, relevant and very actionable by folks who are operating at your level of government. So this was just mentioned, keeping systems up to date. This is first and foremost. Almost every major attack can be attributed in some form to a system that did not have its security patches applied in a timely manner. And don't think that this only applies to servers that are involved in your operations. It really applies to everything: your desktop, your laptop, your phone, your iPhone, your Android device, everything up to and including your Wi-Fi router that runs your office network. Those things are commonly the entry point for attackers. They're a ripe target for people to exploit as well, and firmware updates need to be applied there. So, nonetheless, this adds up to not a small effort to keep on top of, but you simply have to do this. Fortunately, a lot of software vendors are realizing that it's kind of commonplace and a basic expectation these days that if you're going to deliver a product, you have to also deliver an auto update mechanism with that, so that you don't need to spend an hour every day, every week going through all your systems, checking for available updates and applying them. So this second point here is critical. Whenever you see a button that says update me automatically, you should generally check that. And it just takes a lot of the mystery out of this. It's not a silver bullet, but it will definitely put you in a much better position than if you don't. So if you can't do that for any systems, then you have no choice but to stay on top of it yourself. So passwords. Passwords are the most primitive form of security and authentication. They've been around since the dawn of the computing age. As the basic gateway to getting into a system, you have to identify yourself, and that consists of two things: a username, who are you, and a token that only you know, namely a password. People pick terrible passwords, and this has been measured time and time again. So the best answer here, really, in the current day and age, is don't use them at all. And of course, you're asking yourself right now, well, what should I use? If I can't use a password, what other forms of authentication can I rely on? The most common one now that's really starting to become a mainstream offering in various services is something called two-factor authentication. And for those of you not familiar with that, it does employ a password, but it also employs a second component to authentication, usually a device that you have in your hand that you hold. So the idea of two-factor is something that you know, your password, and something that you have, this token, this device. Given that just about everybody operates on a daily basis with a cell phone, that is often what is used as that second factor. So, a two-factor login to Gmail, for example, which you can set up freely and quickly, involves typing in your password, and then as soon as you click enter, something on your phone pops up saying, hey, somebody is attempting to log in from this computer to your account. Would you like to allow this, yes or no? And it requires somebody to click yes or no on your phone, and it only comes up on your phone. So that right there eliminates just an enormous swath of common attacks, people trying to exploit weak passwords. And it's definitely the way of things. For more secure environments, there's no other option. They require two-factor authentication. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's becoming very mainstream. Gmail, set it up yourself there in a few minutes. Whenever it is offered, you should definitely look into using it. And so I also mentioned here something called key-based authentication, which is similar to password authentication, except it employs a key, which is just a very, very long string of random data that is effectively a password, but it's not something you could ever commit to memory. It's something that you have to have, like a physical key. But the short of this message is just don't use your first name as your password. Don't use your birth date as your password. Don't assume that your clever password is going to really stand up to a sophisticated attack. You would be amazed at some of the lengths that the bad guys go to crack passwords, to guess them. It's almost always the easiest entry point into any system. So if you have no choice, then this point comes into play. Password policies. And these generally tend to be set to reasonable levels on IT systems, but if they're not, then absolutely you want to make sure that nobody can enter a single character as their password, or cannot use their username as their password, or cannot use their birthday. All these common things are the first things a bad guy is going to try. So a sane password policy would look something like: must be 12 characters or more, must contain upper and lowercase, must contain alphanumeric characters, cannot be an existing password, cannot be a password that you used previously. There are a lot of rules there that can make a huge difference, and they can be annoying without a doubt, trying to come up with new passwords that meet all these policies, but it's worth doing. Another point that's not on here that I should have added is this. Whenever you can, don't actually use a password that you commit to memory. You should be looking into using some of these password management tools that have become quite commonplace. LastPass is an example. KeyPass is another one. There are quite a few of them. Some better than others, but it's essentially a password vault where you have one password that you commit to memory, and that opens up your password vault, your password database. All your other passwords are stored within it, and those passwords are random, complicated strings of gobbledygook that nobody would ever guess, but you're letting this other system manage that for you. It's generally a much, much better solution than you using some personal password that you have committed to memory and are probably reusing on a dozen different systems. So final point here in terms of best practices is this: educate your users. And this is almost always the biggest challenge. Again, IT is complicated. IT security is even more complicated. And the bad guys know this. And will often attempt to leverage this fact in an attack. The classic social engineering attack is: call up the help desk of an organization, pretend to be a user who has forgotten their password. Obviously, you need to know a little bit about that person, but their first name, their last name, the last four of their social, maybe a few other basic details, things that are often readily available online, are usually enough to get through an IT help desk's authentication phase. And at that point, they'll happily reset your password for you. And if you're a bad guy, you've just gained entry into their environment. So training your users to detect fraudulent attempts to obtain information or to impersonate employees. It's not easy, but there are programs out there that you can follow that will raise the bar significantly across your entire user base. Phishing emails is another subject here that gets very, very frequent mention in the news. A lot of these major attacks are initiated by somebody, the bad guys, sending emails that will look very much like legitimate emails to a user that they know is very likely to click on that email and open it. And that then triggers some malicious code to run, and it gains them entry into their environment. So some of these phishing emails are extremely difficult to identify. But there are telltale signs, and a bit of education, again, will raise the bar significantly. So So that's essentially it. That's the extent of best practices as far as things that you can easily implement on your own in your own environments. So.
Great. Ivan, thank you so much. And if anybody has some questions they want to type in, that, glad to take those now. One that we often get is about cloud and how secure is it okay to put our stuff up in the cloud?
Sure. This is a great question, and unfortunately the answer is not simple. Everybody these days is using the cloud. Whether you know it or not, you are using it. If you're putting data, say in Dropbox or Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, it is going off to remote servers. And the answer is a complicated one. There are some cloud services that are geared towards government usage or geared towards specific security requirements. And that's really the beginning of the conversation. The reality of the cloud is once you share your data, say with Dropbox, you don't actually know physically where that data is going. It's quite possible, unlikely, this might be a bit contrived, but it's entirely possible that, you put your, some sensitive document in Dropbox and it finds its way onto a server in a foreign country. They make no claims that they won't do that. They probably aren't, but they might. And the reason is cost efficiency. It might be much cheaper to operate a data center in a foreign country than it is here on US soil. If you're okay with that, go with it. Amazon or some of the larger cloud providers have an answer to that, and they actually have started offering cloud services that make some guarantees around things like that. They actually have a entire section of their cloud that is geared just towards government usage, and they make guarantees around not doing things like I just mentioned, don't ship my data across the border, adhere to basic security practices in their data center, so on and so forth. So again, the answer is not simple, and the answer changes on a case-by-case basis. Dropbox has had some very high-profile security problems. They actually had an incident, I think, within the last year or two, where for a fairly short time, but nonetheless for a time, all passwords would work on anyone's account. Literally anybody could get to anybody else's data. It was an application error that was deployed. It was very quickly retracted and fixed, but nonetheless, that is a reality when you're putting your data in other people's hands. That said, there's enormous cost efficiency and value to be gained by using some of these services. So it's a balancing act, and all I can say is do your homework, find out if the service is suitable for your use, if it meets your basic security requirements. If you don't know what your requirements are, that's really the place to start, is find out what your own policies need to be and start with that. So that's unfortunately not a simple answer, but it's not a simple problem. So a question came through, can we get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. I assume they'll be posted on and we'll
available. Make this available on our website as well. You mentioned the phishing emails. Mm-hmm. What are some things you can look for to what are some signs that maybe it's not a real email? Because I've gotten these.
Sure.
I mean, people in our organization have gotten these, and it's like, wait, Lamar is not actually asking me to transfer money into his account.
Sure. Some of these can be very, very devious, but the dead giveaways, some of the most basic giveaways, is if there is ever a misspelling, a grammatical error, a logo or an image that doesn't quite match your recollection of what that organization's online presence looks like. They're trying to impersonate somebody, and often these attackers are operating in foreign countries. English is not their first language, and that shines through. So that's the first giveaway. Another giveaway often is this: if ever anybody asks you for your password or personal identifying information via email, stop immediately. No organization with a sane security practice will ever do that, as a rule. If you call in, they might prompt you to authenticate yourself, but they would never do that over email. Another thing to look at very, very carefully is if you do look at an email, it looks legitimate. Let's say it's your bank and they want you to click on a link to log into your account. When you click that link, pay close attention to what happens after that. It will probably fire up a web browser and it will appear to go to your bank, but look at that URL, the title bar. And if it doesn't say https bankofamerica.com, don't go any further. And it's interesting how wily some of these attacks have become. Very recently in the news, there have been many cases of phishing attacks where you would get directed to a website that would say, bankofamerica.com, except if you looked very, very closely, the B was not a standard US ASCII character B. It was a Cyrillic Russian alphabet letter that looked exactly like a B at a glance. If you look very closely, you might notice that one or two of the pixels was slightly off, but that's your browser trying to render a foreign language, and that is an attacker trying to fool you into clicking on a domain that was not actually Bank of America. So if you're just racing through this, you're almost guaranteed you'd miss this. But to give an example of a recent attack that employed this. So again, it's not easy, but with a little bit of training, you can raise your bar, you can cut out vast majority of these attacks. A lot of them are not very sophisticated. The truth of the matter is that even with the most well-trained people, there's always a risk. There is always a risk. When you see organizations like Google getting hacked, the NSA getting hacked, you're up against stiff odds. And the game here is simply to remain at a level of competitiveness where you're not constantly fighting basic security problems. So that's the answer to that.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate this, and now I'm scared. But I'm going to go change my password. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you.